you've been listening to is a collection of sounds from cities all across the world. As you can probably tell, this is not Mike. This is Dave, and I've hijacked the podcast intro for today. So these sounds are some of the moments that I experienced this past June while I was shooting my first feature-length documentary in Europe. In this podcast, I'll be talking with Mike about some of the challenges that go into shooting a feature-length documentary and the excitement of traveling throughout Europe to do it. We get into some really helpful stuff in this podcast, things that young filmmakers really want to know. Everything from raising money on Kickstarter, to conveying your passion to an audience, and how to stay focused when things go wrong. Like always, we end out the podcast by talking about some really awesome food experiences in Europe. So wherever you are, sit back and enjoy the podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the new episode of In Love with the Process. Today, I am hanging out with Dave, who just got back from an exciting adventure doing his very first feature-length documentary in Europe, no less.
That's right. It's also first time out of the country, so it was a lot.
Well, cool. We got a lot to talk about, so I think we should just dive right into it. So if you guys are documentary filmmakers and you want to learn a little bit from Dave's adventures, then definitely hang out with us for the episode. Okay, so first, let's just start at the beginning because I don't think anybody knows about the project yet because it hasn't really gone public. So tell us, what is the project?
Yeah, so it's a documentary about international perspectives on the U.S. and our political system. So a big reason why we wanted to do this was it's sort of a hot topic, and it definitely has a focus on the last 2 years after the recent election. So basically we traveled to 7 countries around Europe. We went to Texas by the Mexican border, and we just talked with a lot of folks about sort of the impact of America and their thoughts.
So then obviously you must be very politically driven as a filmmaker, or is like politics the reason why you're getting into documentaries, or?
I wouldn't say it's the reason why. To be honest, I never really was overly politically active until the last couple of years. And, I thought it was something that's important. And so I was talking to my buddy JJ, who ultimately he was co-directing with me, and we thought this would be a good way to, sort of do something, make a difference.
Mm-hmm. Now, is this your first film?
Yeah, this is the first one.
Now, this is your first film altogether, or just your first feature?
Well, first feature. We've done short, 5-minute pieces in the past, but this is definitely the most ambitious project we've ever tackled.
Okay, and then just a bit more history so that everybody understands. You're currently in film school now, yes?
Yep, I'm going into my last year.
Last year, cool. So, all right, so you have this idea. So you guys came up with this idea for a film that you wanted to do, a film that requires you to actually travel the world, which is a little bit different than most local productions because then you definitely need money. You definitely need a budget for travel. So where do you start? Where did you guys come up with the funds for the film?
So we raised almost $11,000 on Kickstarter.
Nice.
And that money largely was for travel and housing and food, and everything else really we got through donations and help just from our own connections. And that was the first thing that we sort of learned was extremely difficult, was not only raising money, but just reaching out to everybody you know that can help you in some way or another, just telling them about the project. And it was tough at first to ask for all that, but it was really cool that when you started talking about it, you have connections that you don't even know you have. And just, little random things that they can help you with. Like someone knows somebody in Ireland that we ended up staying with for 3 days for free. And it was really cool.
It's really cool, actually. I feel, and, we'll obviously ramble about this more, but I feel like that's a big part of filmmaking. Unlike any sort of profession, everybody kind of wants to be involved, and there's still sort of this mysticism, sort of romanticism around making a film. And I think that if you're genuine and you have a really great idea and you're passionate about it, there's a lot of people that I often find myself surprised. It's like, wow, really? You can help me out? So you never know. Okay, so let's get into, you mentioned Kickstarter. So is this the first time you've ever done a Kickstarter?
Yes, the first experience with Kickstarter.
And what did you learn?
It was tough, man. It was really, really hard. You had to bug people you knew and bug them to bug people they know. And it was weird. It's really, it's difficult to ask for money for funding. And I think Kickstarter is definitely a good place to start for younger filmmakers because you don't really have any other means to a budget aside from, friends and family. But it's a good platform. You can build a nice page for your film, a nice little package of info. And yeah, I think ultimately it is a lot of your personal connections, but we worked every day to try and get past that network. Our friends and family, we tried to push and, stretch it a little bit. Someone that our, friends know that they know.
Yeah.
And, it was sort of successful, but we ended up with almost 11,000. So it was great for us.
Now, that I've done a Kickstarter. I did a Kickstarter for 12Cam. And then, and Tony Fernandez, he was in charge of mine, and he was also in charge of Ian's successful Kickstarter for Godfathers of Hardcore. And we did learn a lot about that. And we can actually do a whole podcast just on Kickstarter. But at the end of the day, it really does come down to what your connections are. And I have a couple questions for you. Did you raise the majority of your money at first? Like, when did you get the most of your cash?
There were a couple. It was sort of like a bell curve. Like in the beginning, in the first 2 days, we were up to I think 2,500, $3,000.
Yep.
And it was a 30-day campaign. And we hit a lull because, we exhausted all of our resources, or at least our initial resources that, when we made our list, we're like, okay, these are the people we can talk to. And you just had to keep fighting with it. There were definitely days where we thought we weren't going to even get close. But then you'd talk to someone who, reaches out to another 10 people, you'd get a little boost. And we ended up having a really big fundraiser at the Hard Rock Cafe. And that was after the halfway point, and we really just had to get creative because through, emailing and texting and posting alone, we weren't going to get there. So
yeah,
we had to figure out other ways to do it.
Yeah.
And it ended up working out.
Yeah, I learned a lot when I did the first one for 12K. And what I tried to do before I set out to do that campaign is I reached out to a lot of other filmmakers that were doing it. And I talked to a lot of other people that had been through it. Because at first I thought I was going to do an Indiegogo. And I thought that the idea that there wasn't a cap and I could take the money no matter what was a thing. And then I was told that actually there being a cap makes you more successful because then people are more, they understand that you're more focused on a goal. They understand that you actually have this thing that you have to accomplish. And if you can do that, if you can accomplish that and convince enough people, then the project is worth happening,
Yeah.
But then I learned pretty early on that you really have to treat it like a campaign, like when they roll out an album, you know what I mean? Like you have to treat it as such and you have to have a plan for it and you have to set, I think I did mine for did I do mine for 60 days? I think it was a month or something.
Yeah, I think they give you 30 or 60 as options.
Yeah, I think it was 60 or I can't remember. It was one of those. But basically I looked at my time frame and said, okay, I have this much time. What am I doing every week? What am I rolling out? And I'm rolling out things 3 times a week. And you, of course, have to do incentives. And incentives for movies are really tough, especially for documentaries. It must have been really difficult.
It was. And it was good and bad because it was hard to really think of things aside from, just them participating in the project. But on the, I guess, more positive side, a lot of it you can make pretty cheap, your incentives. Whether it's credits in the film or early screenings of a scene. One of our things was you can submit questions and we'll ask them to some of our interviewees. So we were able to actually cut down a lot of costs. But again, it was tough to think of things that would actually get people to want to give.
Yeah, because when you look at the very successful campaigns that have been on Kickstarter, it's usually someone doing like a comic book or an actual product.
Mm-hmm.
So like part of you doing that, you're actually purchasing that product, or you're getting access to something before anybody else does. And with films, I feel like, now it's changing a lot since I did the Kickstarter, because people are doing subscription services. But I think people automatically are like, well, I should just see it anyways. Like, this is just going to end up on YouTube, so why would I give you money to see something that's going to go out? So it's a very difficult process, and I'm bringing this stuff up because I know that there might be some listeners that are looking for the answers, and I think that with narrative stuff is a bit easier for me because I had to do a lot of concept art. I had to do a lot of that. So I was teaming up with like comic book artists like Ben Templesmith, and a lot of my sort of famous concept artists were donating work and art that people could buy for prints. But even that sort of dives into that territory as a photographer where like, who the fuck wants to buy prints anymore? Like, who the fuck wants any of that? So it's more of a collective item. And I really got caught up in this when I was doing it. I'm like, okay, so what am I giving this audience, and what am I giving you for products? And, we gave away props and we did that kind of stuff. It wasn't until it clicked with me that I felt like a majority of people want to buy into your passion.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that's what they're purchasing. They're purchasing the right to be included. They're purchasing the level of interest that they have, like sort of the accessibility to your project. Like I had the Directors in a Circle, which is something that I was doing for mine, where if you paid a certain amount of money, then I would let you see rough cuts, and I would turn to you as my first line of review. So that way people can actually give their input, give their advice, and sort of do their stuff. And that was actually really successful. But it's really just about the passion, I think. And it's about selling that passion. And then when you're scheduling out your time, I plan certain releases for articles. Now, I don't know, a lot of listeners may not know this. When you see articles written on movies online, most of the time it's the filmmaker or the producing or the distributor that writes those articles. And most websites are really lazy when it comes to writing content. And not all, there's some really great ones. But a majority of them are looking for that press release. So whatever you write in your press release, most of the content of that article will be them cutting and pasting what your press release is. And then they'll throw some flair, or they'll throw like a paragraph or a few sentences in there. And so what I tried to do is I wrote a bunch of different press releases in a bunch of different outlets, and sort of examined with my film. I had the horror market. I also have the comic book geek market. I also have the tech market, because Lyndon was a Wired magazine published like biochemist photographer. And so you write these press releases and then you roll them out. And then a big portion of it, the only reason why you're doing it, well, two. One, you're building an audience, which is secondary. But two, everybody that's in your circle as donators sees this.
Right.
And they see this sort of snowball effect that's happening, and it's like, holy shit, there's articles written on this. Oh my God, this is a huge thing. Because then you need to go back to those folks. So as you're building that snowball effect through the whole process, then the excitement rolls in, and then that carries you, because you're very right about the lulls, right? Because you saying in the beginning you got your chunk of change and then you hit that midpoint.
It was the beginning. We got a good amount. Throughout the middle, it was a struggle. It was a fight to keep money coming in every day. But then, and this goes back to Kickstarter versus Indiegogo, as people saw the project become more successful, and as we got closer to our goal, it skyrocketed, because people want to be that one that gets it to 100%. And I think it was funny you said that two of the things that really get people motivated are your passion, and like as it gains traction, now they want to become a part of it. Yeah. And I totally agree. And you said that you think it was almost easier for you because it was narrative?
Yeah. I mean, docs are, Ian's doc is a little bit different. Ian's film, Godfathers of Hardcore, is about this amazing band, Agnostic Front, that is the godfathers of the scene, and they have a fan base. So they already have a group of people that are behind them. and they already have a catalog of music and collectibles and all these different items. But if I was doing a documentary on a chef, or if I was doing a documentary on, like you are, on some sort of social event, like what do you, I mean, if it was a chef, maybe he can cook a meal to certain people, but like what do you provide for them?
So we knew, and this was almost a year and a half ago now, before we even had settled on this film, we knew that we were going to do something for Kickstarter. We had a goal in the next, period of time that we wanted to raise money on Kickstarter and produce a film. So initially we were thinking narrative. But as we were thinking about that, it was hard for us to see people really buying into the idea unless it was, like this groundbreaking new thing that had never been done, and that was really daunting to think about. So we moved on to this, and not because it was a documentary, but because it was about Donald Trump, that, everybody has something to say.
Smart.
About the U.S. right now, about Trump. So we were banking on the fact that people would buy into the idea, and through our own passion, they would, therefore buy into the project. So that was kind of our, a year and a half ago, that was our strategy.
It's funny that we both have a fear. And I think that really is a big part of filmmaking. We both have that sort of fear initially where you say, you have to do something groundbreaking, you have to do something different. I don't think you do. Right? Yeah. From a narrative standpoint, I know that as long as it's something that I'm passionate about, and as long as it's something that you think that there is an audience for, you have to be smart. You have to sit there, like you were saying, and go, okay, there's an audience that would want to see this. But it's funny. It's funny that I think it would be easier to do it for narrative, and you thought it was easier to do it for this.
I think it was this specific topic. I think I would be less likely to go for a doc if it wasn't about something that everybody really cared about. So I think it was kind of just like right time for it.
Okay. So then you, what did you set your goal at 11,000?
We set it at 10.
Oh, good. So you went over. And did you have to set stretch goals or anything, or did you just go over?
Informally.
Yeah.
We just, would post on the page, hey, if we get to X amount, we'll add on this to the trip.
So how long did it take you to do the whole Kickstarter campaign and run the whole thing and sort of?
We were planning that thing, 3 months before we launched. We were ready to launch about a month before we did. And then it was there for, the 30 days. Took I think a couple weeks after for the money to actually roll in.
Yeah, it does.
And then Kickstarter took a chunk.
That's all the sort of stuff that you don't think about.
Yeah. We planned for our budget, and then there's a lot of things that you got to do that meticulously, and that was a learning curve for sure.
Yeah. Are they still using Amazon to deliver the funds? I can't remember. I think at one point they were.
No, they actually had us set up like a separate checking account, and it just rolled right in through there.
So they must have. I think when I was doing it, they were running it through Amazon. It was very strange. And then when I did it early on, the paperwork was really messy, and
yeah,
it was very difficult to sort of process it all. And then it's like, how many people? And then the strange thing is that even though people say that they're going to donate that amount, they pull out sometimes.
Yeah.
It had a lot of pullouts that you were like, fuck. Well,
we lost and it's only $250, but we lost $250. It could have been anything from like a card that bounced, and
yeah,
they give you time to fix your donation, but if you don't in 4 or 5 days, just gone.
Yeah, and then you're writing to all these people and you're trying to explain to them that they're having problems with their card, and you're trying to deal with all that stuff. And then you really have to plan out how, because I had a spreadsheet of data that I really couldn't figure out. And I had to figure out how to categorize all that stuff and sort of catalog it so that I was like, okay, this who gets this incentive, this who gets that. Like, it was very difficult. And I'm sure they've made changes since, but when I did the 12KM thing, me and Tony were pulling our hair out, just going like, who owns what, and okay, and where's it going? And then you have to, basically for us, we had to ship a lot of stuff. So we had like prints and DVDs and all sorts of shit. And so then we are opening up a shipping office, basically, and we're trying to figure out like, what's the cheapest way to get all this mail out, and do I make a deal with the post office? And doing a Kickstarter, and I think a lot of people don't realize it, doing a Kickstarter is like starting up a whole other business.
Oh yeah.
and it's a big part of it. And so when you look at how long it takes to make these Kickstarter films, and for me, like 12 Cam was like 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Like the first year of 12 Cam was like all that pre-pro and all that Kickstarter fundage. And okay, so you now have your loot, you now have your cash, and you've sorted through your Kickstarter stuff. So what's next?
So after we got all the cash, we had been, throughout that whole process, assuming that we would reach our goal. We'd been planning out where we're going to stay, looking for cheap flights. And that was really stressful because that changed day to day. So
Yeah.
we had our budget, but it was very imperfect because travel costs,
Fluctuate.
we could be off by thousands of dollars. So really, I mean, right after we got the money, we started booking, essentially. That was like a few days after.
So so what's the plan? Where are you headed? Who are you talking to?
So we came up with a list of, I think, 7 countries. It was Iceland, Ireland, Spain, England, France, and Germany. And then Texas, right by the border of Mexico.
Well, besides the last one, it sounds like a wonderful vacation.
Yes. And, it's funny, and I would love to talk about this more, but the most unsafe I felt on the entire trip was the bus station in Dallas.
Really?
Out of all the places we went, I was the most sketched out by the Dallas bus station. So
Okay, so you're traveling through some pretty amazing spots.
Mm-hmm.
But that's going to be expensive. Like, were you guys just sort of banking on going all in one chunk to try to save money? Are you just flying to one specific place and then taking trains around? Like, how are you guys? Because even you guys have. Well, let me start again. How many of you are leaving here from the U.S.?
2 of us. It was a really, really small crew. It was 2 of us from the U.S. and we actually worked with a DP from Germany. And we covered his travel costs, and that was our payment to him.
Okay, so let's sort of really examine this. You have $11,000
Mm-hmm.
for 2 people to travel to Europe for how long? How long were you gone for?
We were in Europe for 21 days.
I don't know how you did it.
I don't know either.
I don't know how you did it.
It was, yeah. And thankfully, we sort of built into the budget $1,000 for like, oh shit, emergency money.
Yeah.
And we burned through that really quickly. But
Okay, so if you guys have that kind of loot, I mean, I don't know if you could do that. Can you break it down to like did you guys work on what your daily budgets would be? Or did you just sort of wing it?
it was, we gave ourselves a daily budget for food because a lot of the other stuff had already been paid for. So when we got over there, we didn't have a ton of cash left because flights were prepaid. Rental cars were like half prepaid. Housing was all prepaid. So we gave ourselves a daily allowance for food. And then that oh shit money went to miscalculations with airlines, transport, which was super expensive in Iceland and England.
Transport, what do you mean?
Like public transport. We'd take buses everywhere, take Ubers.
Oh, wow. Is that expensive?
Oh, Iceland actually was super expensive. Iceland, to go like 10 miles to our hotel was $90
What?
on a bus.
On a bus?
Yeah. So that's and again, that's where the learning curve comes in. We should have done our research a little bit better.
Wow. Well, yeah, who would ever see? That's crazy. That's crazy. But that's the fun part about doing doc stuff is that you're like, okay, well, I think I got this all figured out. Interesting. Okay, so where'd you guys fly into?
So we flew into Reykjavik, and that was really, when we were figuring out our list of places to go, it was a combination of countries where we thought we would get the best content and also countries where we had the resources to live there, to meet people based on our own connections and with the help of Suffolk. Iceland was sort of an outlier because we really didn't have to go there for the movie. It was just really cheap to travel there. So we saved, we booked round trip flights from Montreal to Reykjavik for, I think, $270.
Out of Boston?
Out of Montreal. So we drove up to
Okay,
Montreal.
Wow.
But still, I mean, getting from North America to Europe usually it can be up to $1,000 for a round trip
Wow,
flight.
that's what I was thinking, yeah.
So that saved us a ton of money.
Huh. Okay, so then you get there, and then how did you? Okay, let's go back. How did you set up who your interviews were going to be with?
So we got a lot of help from Suffolk. We met with a couple administrators who knew sort of like academics and scholars in Europe. So we wanted to get a few of those people, sort of like experts in their fields. But a big part of the film is not only just experts in, these political pundits and people that, do this for a living, but also average people. So thankfully, Suffolk is pretty diverse, and there's a lot of students from around the world. So we just started talking to people. And like the whole month and a half, 2 months before we left, just everyone we would meet, we would tell them what we were doing, and just writing down lists of people that we could talk to while we were over there. And that goes back to the beginning. When you're making a movie, when you're making a documentary, everyone sort of wants to be involved, especially if they like the idea or if they see that you're passionate about it. So we got a lot of unexpected breaks and really cool people to talk to just by telling people that we were doing this. So that's how we got a lot of our interviews, was simply by talking about the film.
Sounds pretty smart that you guys are taking full advantage of the school. I mean, in the past, a couple of podcasts, I've sort of trashed, film schools lately and being overcharging for that sort of stuff. But these guys, it sounded like they really came through for you guys. Was it?
They did. And, they helped us a ton, but I agree. It's really expensive to go to a film school. And, especially for something that you learn, I think, most outside of the classroom.
Yeah.
However, they did, they saw our passion for this. They saw how much work we were doing outside of the classroom. So I think when you do that, they're going to be more inclined to help. So they ended up donating about $8,000 of equipment to us, or loaning it to us. And without that, we would not have had close to the funds to be able to do this. So they did that. They put us up in 3 countries, and they organized, one of the administrators helped us organize, I think, 7 interviews in Europe.
Wow, okay. So if you look at it from the perspective of like, all right, however much it costs you to go per year, and then you got back from that, probably, like $20,000 worth of stuff for this film.
Mm-hmm.
That's not bad.
Yeah, I mean, it was really good. But again, it was on us. And I think that's sort of the thing about going to a film school is, you're paying a lot of money, and I think more than you should. Mm-hmm. Unless you seek out the opportunities, unless you really go out of your way to utilize the resources, you could just kind of coast through, and then you get out in all this debt, and you're like, well, why did I just do that? So I think for me, I was just trying to kind of squeeze every ounce of help I could out of them.
Dude, I mean, the truth of the matter is that that's going to be the way it is for every day of your life as a filmmaker. So it's good that you're learning that there. Those are the skills that I learned when I went to New York Film Academy for a while, was like how to produce and how to pull that. And those are the same skills that I use daily. Daily, I use those skills. So, all right. So then they helped you out. You find these spots. You end up traveling over to Europe pretty cheap. And then, so how does the adventure begin?
So, we get into Reykjavik, and it's, I think, 3 a.m, and it's like twilight, because we went in the summer, and it is like 24-hour daylight. It just doesn't get dark. So we had like an overnight flight. We were exhausted, and that day we ended up sleeping in a car because we were leaving for Ireland the next day. So we didn't want to waste all the time of, checking into a hotel, doing all this. So we drove around Iceland for about like 17 hours. This is the first time we even met the DP. So we were driving around for like 17 hours, just getting some landscape stuff, just establishing, kind of just meeting each other and just hanging out.
Yeah.
We slept in the car. And
What did he say about that?
he knew, hey, he's 30, so he is not a college student. But we told him this is on a college budget, man. So,
well, you know what? Power to that guy for having the ball. Because I think once you've been in the business until you're 30, you're sort of like, I am over this shit. And so the fact that I'll put it this way, buddy. I know you. I would not sleep in a fucking car for you. After traveling to another country, and how long was the flight?
It's about 5 hours.
Yeah, still, fuck you.
No, it sucked. It really sucked. There were more floors slept on that trip. Some cars. It was brutal.
Well, it's part of the growing pains.
I will say after that day, it felt like we'd known each other for a month. So I think that was a good way to start it off.
Yeah. Because then the adventure begins, right?
Oh yeah, and then it was a grind from there. It was tough. It was a lot of work. Not a lot of time for sightseeing, but we tried to incorporate that into the work.
So you've done some small productions. You've done some small films locally. So you guys you're an editor as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you sort of have your brain wrapped around technically what you should be doing, and then you're sort of bringing these past experiences with you, where it's like, okay, this is how I should get my sound, and this is how I should get my coverage. So now you've set yourself up for such a bigger learning curve. What are some of the first things that you learned that you didn't know here?
It was every aspect of the process. I learned a ton because I had never done it. Everything from, we shot an S-Log. That was a whole battle in itself.
How come?
We wanted, so before we left, when we were picking our countries, we wanted a distinct look for each country, based on sort of the heaviness of the interviews. And I thought it would be really cool to sort of see different colors for each country, because I think that would help it kind of distinguish the places that we were. And it would give a different emotion to each place that we traveled, because a lot of the people that we talked to in each country had similar answers and similar thoughts about the U.S. So I liked the idea of having a lot more control over how it looked for each place.
Yep.
So
then that's why you shot it in S-Log?
Yeah.
And this was your call to shoot in S-Log? What did the DP say?
He was in. We had a similar thought.
So why was that challenging when you said it was challenging to shoot in S-Log?
Never shot log footage before. So
did you guys use LUTs or anything?
Nope, we could not afford to bring a field monitor.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, so it was a lot of work at night doing, looking back at all the footage.
I feel like we're going to have to do a follow-up episode with you in post-production.
I think we will.
Talk about your color correction process on this one. Yeah.
It's going to be a battle.
Well, that's good. Okay, so you learned about that. What were some of the big learning curves for you?
How to deal with everything when things went wrong. That was the biggest one. And we'd known that things were going to go wrong, but you never know how you're going to deal with it, especially when you're in foreign countries. You haven't slept in a few days.
Yeah.
And just staying on track, staying motivated toward that goal. And that was really, as we moved forward, that was sort of my biggest responsibility, was keeping everyone, in a good headspace, keeping everyone happy as they could be, going over the checklist every day, saying, okay, this is what we got to do today. We get through it. And that was, you'd never done anything like it.
And, I've heard other interviews with people that say very similar things, and that's usually where they stop. And I think we should really dig into this a little bit, because a huge part of producing your own project is anxiety. Anxiety is like the biggest thing. And there's that anxiety that if you're a creative that you have when you're not doing something, and it's like, what am I doing with my fucking life? How am I earning the days that I am not painting houses? Like, what am I doing? That anxiety drives you to do that. Then there's the anxiety of, sometimes you feel like a con artist. Sometimes you're sitting there going, I'm convincing all these people that this is perfect. I'm convincing all these people that this is going to be really great. But the glory of filmmaking is that it's all in theory. It's always all in theory. And making a film is a risk, straight up, because there are all these outside factors that an individual cannot have control over. And oftentimes I'll see younger filmmakers, and even myself in my history, you're confronted with this anxiety. You're confronted with the knowledge that it's like a Jenga fucking tower. And so you're dealing with this thing that's going to topple at any second. And all it takes is the smallest thing from someone who is so very small and insignificant to the overall project. Where, like, you know, a tire blowing on a car, like a situation like that can totally ruin your day, can totally ruin everything, and just sort of domino effect straight through. And I think one of the best skills that it sounds like you picked up, one of the best skills that you can learn as a filmmaker is how to process that anxiety, and also how to process the end of the world at any moment. And I think that if you can figure out how to stay calm and what your focus points are through those moments, then you're a powerful filmmaker. Like, so you're confronted with, what is the worst thing that you were confronted with on the trip?
The worst thing, there was one day, and this was in England. Yeah, we were flying from England to Germany. We had a super early flight. We were at the airport at, I think, 5 a.m. So we'd left our hostel at 4. And it was going well, but this was like entering the second half of the trip, and we sort of hit a wall, at least with our energy. You know, it was starting to really get to us. And we get to the airport, and we're checking in, and we'd done the same process for every flight. And we flew Ryanair, which is a notoriously cheap airline. I mean, we booked this flight for like $25 from England to Germany. It's super cheap.
Okay.
However, there's a very specific Ryanair process that you have to do. And, you know, at the bottom of one of the emails that they sent us, overlooked it, didn't read the whole thing. So we get there to check in. And at this point, you know we have a tight budget. We get to check in, and they're like, oh, you didn't check in online? That's $300 each.
What? Oh, so it's like their gimmick? Is that?
Yeah, that's what it is. You know, they give you these super cheap flights, but if you don't do everything exactly the way that they do it, there's no wiggle room.
Oh, motherfuckers.
So, yeah, and that was a punch in the face at that point. I mean, that was brutal.
Yeah.
And we had a huge day in Germany, so that was our task for that day, was dealing with that. And, you know, yeah, it sucks, but...
So then they tell you that it's going to cost you, how many people? 3 people?
Mm-hmm.
So it's, what, $900 it's going to cost you?
Yeah, it was a little bit less than that. I think it wasn't quite 300, but...
And so then how did you so what was your thought process when they tell you that?
You know, I mean, you're shocked at first, but what are you going to do? We're not going to book another flight to Germany. So you just pay it and you move on. I mean, it was the hardest thing. But it was a good learning process where things like that, not to that severity, but things went wrong all the time. And from the beginning to the end, there was such a difference that I noticed in me where, you know, it could feel like the end of the world, but you just kind of let it roll off your shoulders and focus on the next thing you have to do, because if you don't, it's going to be that much worse the rest of the way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, I could have sat there and thrown a fit and started yelling at the lady at the register who clearly, you know, it's not her policy. Mm-hmm. It's Ryanair.
Yep.
You know, me getting pissed and doing that is not going to help anything. It's just going to make me mad when we shoot an interview in 4 hours, and then we'll, you know, fuck up audio there, and then I'll be more mad that night. So
it's good, man. It sounds like you landed like one of the big ones for this. And that's like, there's a lot of, there are some filmmakers that I know that would have handled that differently. And it's very easy to sort of fall into that mindset of like, why did these things keep happening to me? And why I did everything that I'm supposed to do, and why is the world against me, and why is this not going the way I wanted to? And I think there's a big misconception with directors, and it might be in some of the marketing for other directors from the past, where they market directors as being fucking geniuses and they have control over everything, and your job is that you are controlling everything. And then if you do all of your prep, then the world will do exactly what it is that you want it to do, which, to put it lightly, is bullshit, like absolute bullshit. And I think that my experience at being a director is that you are essentially strapped to the front of a fucking train, and that train is going at 100 miles an hour, and you're desperately trying to pull people aside and get people on board. And at the same token, you're trying to keep it on the track that you've set for it. And the more of these you do, the more you'll come to realize that, hey, also there are a couple of other running parallel tracks that I'm hoping to encounter as I encounter these problems. Because then as you encounter something like this, you end up having to come up with a creative fix for that,
right,
which then throws your entire process into a whole new direction that you could never have planned for in pre-production. So what you're starting to see here are like the really exciting portions of being a director. It isn't necessarily having a great story to tell. It isn't necessarily knowing how a camera works. All those are just bits and pieces. If you're talking about ultimately what it is that we do, which is tell stories to human beings and convey what experiences that we've been through, this is a big part of it. And this is something that I learned when I was doing 12KM, which was a nightmare shoot because it was so small and so tiny. But every day I would come home after going through some sort of battle and fixing some sort of battle or confronting a battle. And I would just, honestly, before I went to sleep, I'd put on YouTube and I'd watch an interview with a director that I really loved. And I would listen to that director talk about his battles and all his shit. And I hit that point when I went, okay, so this is a guy who's been doing directing for 40-something years. And if he's still going through this 40 years from now, this is part of my job. So I need to get used to this. This has to be what the job's about, and I have to be really okay with it. So it's exciting to hear you talk about that, because I think you're starting to see through this experience what directing really is.
Well, and you're totally right when you said that when a lot of people think about directors, it's sort of still this, like, not mysterious, but you see them as like these like perfect.
It's very mythical.
Right, mythical. That's it. Where you think they have everything under control. Like when they plan something out, it all goes that way. And it's funny because that's how I used to think about it. Where like I got to be like him. Where like I'll plan it out and it'll actually work that way. But
it's a hard thing to learn because directing isn't something that you really can apprentice. And if you're on a crew, like if you're an assistant director, or if you're a PA that is involved with like the assistant directing department or the producing department, you can see things. But a lot of those folks that I talk to, they don't really have that perspective. They're usually like, this thing got fucked up and we all had to fix this thing that got fucked up. And it becomes like this thing that like everybody complains about and they roll their eyes on. They go, it didn't go as fucking planned, and and it's this whole thing. But the truth of it is, there's two ways to look at it. There's that way. There's the world's out to get us, and fuck everybody. But then there's also that other way of like, this is what it is. And so if you're setting out to do it, and I'm setting out to do a big feature right now. And so I have that mindset of like, I am going into this world. I am stepping into a sandbox that is bigger than I've ever been in before. And I know that I'm going to be learning as I go. And I need to do all my homework. I need to do all that prep. I need to have everything put together the way it should be to fall back on. But I know it's going to get fucked up. And I just have to be like, cool, show me what it's going to do. Like, present what this fucked upness is going to be. And then I will go, all right, well, this is how we fix it. This is where we go. This is what we do. And, it's not like you're a monk. I'm still going to be like screaming and crying, but it's the job,
Right.
So, we got off on a bit of a tangent, but I think it was a good tangent.
Yeah.
All right. So let's see here. Let me go to my notes to keep us on track a little bit. All right. So, you set up these interviews through the school. So did all the interviews come through for you? Did you have any surprising interviews? Like what happened with that?
A lot of them did, but there were definitely a few that didn't. And probably, I think, the funniest and just craziest story of the trip was, and I think we talked about this a little bit with John Rule. So through not even a connection that we knew, this was a professor that Suffolk set us up with. We were interviewing him, and it was great. He was from the London School of Economics. At the end of our interview, now that he knew a bit more about the project, he said, guys, you should talk to this guy, Lord McLennan. He's a member of the House of Lords, and he'd been in Parliament for 50 years. So we were like, sweet, yeah. So he gave us his email. We sent this guy an email. He got back to us like the next day. We talked on the phone, we went back and forth via email, and he was like, guys, you should come to Parliament, and we're going to do this interview. Yeah. So we were like, ecstatic. I mean, we're going into Parliament. We're going to interview someone in the House of Lords who's been in Parliament for 50 years.
It's crazy.
So we get there, and we'd never met this guy. We barely met the professor who referred him. And we go up to all these armed guards at the doors. And we're three dudes who don't look anything alike. We're carrying these big bags, and we're talking to these guys with rifles, saying, "Yep, we're supposed to get into Parliament there." And they're like, "Nope, no, you're not." So they held us up there because we were supposed to meet him there, and he wasn't there. So after like 5 minutes of like shitting ourselves, he shows up. He's an older guy, and he brings us through Parliament. He's walking us around, and it's absolutely breathtaking. Like, that was the craziest sight, I think, of the whole trip, because we were in the depths of Parliament.
That's crazy.
And he's walking us around. We go sit down. We have tea and biscuits, and he starts talking to us. And we'd gone back and forth over email. We talked to him on the phone. He starts talking to us, and like 20 minutes go by, and he's not saying anything about the interview. So we were just like, okay, what's going on? So he asks, what are you guys doing in London? And we're like, oh, this is one of our stops for the documentary. And we were about halfway done. And he's an older guy. He's probably 85, 90. He goes, oh, you're shooting a movie, are you? And he forgot that he had brought us here to do an interview for a movie.
Oh, God. And
we slowly realized after that he kept asking, the same questions. And I don't know if I should be saying this, throwing his name out there, but...
Oh, my goodness.
It was wild. So he ended up taking us around, and he was such a nice guy. He took us around, all of Parliament, and we ended up asking him again, because now we had to ask him for a second time if he would do the interview. And originally he said no. He said he didn't have time. So we were like, shit, like, we just lost this awesome interview.
Yeah, right. I mean, we got a great tour through Parliament, but yeah,
come on.
Yeah.
So then 2 minutes later, after I had just asked him, our DP, Dennis, said the same thing. They go, oh, do you think we could do the interview today? He goes, yes, of course. So it was the weirdest thing. But, somehow it worked out.
That's wild. That's really wild. Well, you got to see Parliament, and that's okay. So this brings me to my next question. So this is your first time as a young American outside of the country.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what did the other lifestyles look like to you? How did it feel to you?
some of them were similar, but some of them were very different. And it was really cool. Like Madrid felt so old. That was actually kind of a common thread, was how old it felt, because I mean, these countries, the ones that weren't destroyed by war, I mean, have been there for far longer than the U.S.
Yeah.
And the lifestyles were really different in every place that we went, and that was the coolest part. Politics aside, the documentary aside, I mean, just getting to sit down and meet people that live a different culture was awesome. And the connection, the documentary was our connection, and it was incredible to see how many people we met in these countries that had never met us but were so willing to participate and help us. And this is outside of the U.S. These are places we've never gone, people we never met. And it was cool. I mean, it sort of solidified and almost validated, like, why we wanted to do this was to, show commonalities and similarities between just people. And that was the coolest part, was just meeting these people.
Mm. And did you find that, I guess at its core, at everybody's core values, does everybody have the same goals, do you think? Or is it?
Yeah, it was, the answers varied, but at the heart of it, they were the same. I mean, it was people that, wanted their families to succeed. They wanted peace. We didn't talk to anyone who said that, they wanted fighting between countries. I mean, and this is aside from Trump, this is all the political bullshit that goes on a daily basis. When you talk to the people of each place, they all have the same sentiments. They just want their families to succeed. They want their countries to succeed, but they just want to live their lives. And that was really the coolest part, was just when you break it down. We were in a pub in Ireland with 2 Americans, a German, an Irish guy, and a South African girl. And we just sat around having beers, and it was, you would never tell that we all grew up in different parts of the world. And we just sat and talked for 2 hours.
That's the amazing thing.
It was incredible.
That's the amazing thing about people, because our job is that, hanging out with people and talking with people. And you feel like after all this manipulation, and I'm not going to get too deep in this, but after all this manipulation that's going on, whether it's manipulation for marketing or manipulation for political reasons, and these stories that are sold to us and told to us that are crafted in such a very specific way that threatens that core thing, that threatens your happiness, that threatens your family's happiness, that gives you a sense of fear in your future. So as a species, I feel like we're very simply manipulated by attacking that core. And then when you sort of step out of that, like if you put your phone down for a whole day, or if you walk out of any sort of place that you can be manipulated and you just physically hang out with folks, you learn that none of that really matters. And at the end of the day, if we hang out together and we sit down and have a meal together, we're going to get along perfectly. It's really fascinating. And you're seeing that on a global scale. I saw that more on a local scale when I did that documentary with Rudy Hippolyte on the gangs here in Boston. And the fact that you would have these blood rivalries from like street, like block to block, essentially, and then this was happening 2 or 3 blocks from like one of the wealthiest portions of Boston. So it's so condensed at that point. And it's really just people making decisions off of propaganda, which is fascinating.
And I know we always get into food, but it really is. I mean, the best experiences I had were eating meals with people, because it really, I mean, you speak different languages, you're different cultures, but I mean, when you sit and have a beer and have a meal with someone, I could have been in any of the countries that I was. You can't even tell. It's like, a lot of people did speak English, so that was helpful.
Yeah.
But really, I mean, it was totally broken down. And there's definitely a whole rabbit hole we could go down with all that stuff. But the bottom line was it was an awesome experience.
So you bring up this point about them all speaking English. So did everybody you interview speak your language? Was it easy for you?
No. So there were 3 interviews that we had to do in German. Mm-hmm. And there were a couple more that they did speak English, but you could tell they were a bit uncomfortable. So that was actually challenging because I conducted all the interviews. That was tough when they weren't comfortable speaking English to get them to be emotional, because it felt very robotic, and that's totally understandable. But that was a learning curve in itself. It was.
So what did you have a translator for the Germans?
Yes, our DP was German.
Okay, right.
So he helped us out with that.
So what was that like? So you tell the DP what questions to ask, and then he asks those questions, but then does the DP have to then translate what his answer was back to you, and then you're sort of processing it that way?
So what we did for those, the night before, we would sit down and talk for about an hour, things that I wanted to focus on. Mm-hmm. And then he would, go with a list of questions or topics that I wanted him to talk about. And after that was done, this is during the interview, he would just come to me and say, the gist of what was said, what was missed. But honestly, I sort of let him take the lead with that, because he shared the same culture with those people. And I think it was better for him to do it rather than have me ask the question in English, have him translate it.
Yeah.
I think that would have felt a lot weirder for the people answering the questions versus someone that they share the language with, they share the culture with. So I trusted him to sort of take the lead, because I thought it would make the people we were talking to feel a lot more comfortable.
It sounds like a smart directorial decision, actually. Because at the end of the day, with documentaries, it's all about trying to make the person that's sitting in front of a camera and 3 people forget the fact that they're sitting in front of a camera.
Right, and if they're hearing a foreign language shouted at them and then, someone else translating it.
Yeah.
We tried that for the start of it, and it just felt really robotic, so we just ditched that, said, here's some topics, just talk to them, just have a conversation.
So now, in post, are you going to have all that stuff transcoded and then translated for you? Like, how are you going to cut that shit? Yeah,
well, we're going to have, he thankfully is going to do that, because I would rather have him do it than someone else, because I don't, it gets weird with imperfect translations, so I would rather have him do it, because he was asking the questions. So if there's not like an exact translation, he'll be able to give us the closest to English that it would be, because he was there doing it.
You're pretty lucky finding this guy. How'd you find him? Was he an online find? Or?
Through Instagram.
Instagram does it again.
Mm-hmm. Instagram You're shocked.
Does it again. Again, a lot of people give me shit for the amount of time I spent on Instagram. Instagram is one of the best social things that I have used to date.
It was really helpful. He's a really talented guy, and we're really lucky to work with him.
Very cool, man. Very cool. Okay, so, of course, me being me, so you're traveling from country to country. Mm-hmm. What's the best food you ate, and where did you eat it?
Okay, so the best single meal that I had was in Madrid.
Oh, I've always wanted to go to Madrid. Okay.
It was awesome.
So where did you eat? Was it in a restaurant? Or?
It was in a restaurant, and it was all Spanish, obviously. So I speak a little bit of Spanish, so I could do like basic translations. But basically what we ended up doing was telling the waiter that we wanted a bunch of tapas, and he just brought us out like 6 or 7 dishes, and we just all shared it.
Ugh.
And that was the best meal by far.
Now, did you have any stuff made by locals, or?
Yeah, so we stayed, and this is actually one of the people that Suffolk hooked us up with. When students study abroad in Madrid, they have connections that they put them with host families. Mm-hmm. So we stayed with a host mother, and she cooked for us every night.
It's crazy.
And that was delicious. I mean, the restaurant was great, the tapas, but I mean, a home-cooked meal by, someone who lives there, you can't beat it. Homemade gazpacho, like, oh God.
Now, did she speak English?
No English. And that was another thing. I walked up to the door. It was like 1:30 in like a weird part of Spain. I don't know anything about it. And we open the door with 3 suitcases, and she just starts shouting Spanish, like, arms up, ready to give me a hug. And I looked like a deer in headlights because I didn't know anything that she was saying.
But that's awesome, man. Like these are these experiences that are going to become these little keystones for you.
It really made it better too, I think, being thrust into the culture. We could have done this, and this was something we thought about. We could have done this in America because there's enough diversity here. There are enough people from other countries that we could have talked to everybody from the countries that we traveled to.
Yeah.
But it's so much different when you're not in that culture.
Mm-hmm.
I think if we did it here, everything would have been totally Americanized, and it wouldn't have been authentic. And even asking the questions, I think, for me, I had to ask them through a different sort of filter. Like, I was a foreigner, so that's going to be different than me asking questions in America.
Yeah, and that's so interesting. And I haven't seen it yet, but Oliver Stone's new doc that he did for HBO on Putin is interesting for that same reason. Like, I saw an interview with him. Sorry to get off on a sidetrack here, but I saw an interview with him, and I think he was on one of the late night shows, and the host was giving him a hard time because he's been getting a lot of criticism because he wasn't really hard on Putin. Mm-hmm. Like, he actually wasn't like calling him out and being a dick. You're going to ask him all these different questions, and apparently I haven't seen the piece yet, and who knows what political bullshit is involved with it. But apparently it isn't like a hard-hitting Putin documentary. It's more of a, this is what's going on. And then, of course, you're dealing with a lot of Putin's preconceived output. But it's got to be really difficult to be a foreigner and to be a filmmaker that gets access to something like that, and then to go in there with the fucking arrogance of an American director and just go, so tell me about all this shit. You know what I mean? I think that there's a misconception with documentary in general where everybody associates documentary with like journalism and like and like deep journalism and all that. And I think that there are varying degrees of how documentaries work. And I think sometimes just getting in there and seeing somebody in their actual thing, and even if what they're selling you is bullshit, you actually are experiencing what that is and you're seeing them process that. And if you're a talented enough filmmaker, without assaulting somebody, you'll actually get access to who they are as a real human being. And then it might actually, instead of just sort of fueling or feeding that hunger that the audience has for like retribution or whatever the fuck, you're actually giving them an honest to God look at something.
Yeah. And I really think it was worth it being a foreigner in that position, because the way I ask questions is different because I'm uncomfortable. I have to phrase them differently than if I was in America. And their answers are totally different because they're in their home country. And there was a lot of anti-Americanism. And I don't mean it to be as harsh as it sounds, but
well, okay, so are they just reacting to what is their idea of what an American is? And generally, we're talking generally here. I'm sure each one was different.
Generally, they think America, and I agree to a large extent, that Americans are just like off in their own world. Like, they don't really know or care to know about a lot of other countries in the world. There's a lot of resentment over the last election, for sure. So what was good for us was a lot of people we talked to were very pleased that American filmmakers were doing this. They were happy that we connected with a German filmmaker. It sort of like showed them something, because their idea, and this comes from their media, but their idea of Americans are, they don't give a shit about the rest of the world. And I mean, that goes right, I hate getting political, but that goes right back to Trump's rhetoric of America first. Like, that's the message that's being sent.
Yeah.
So,
okay, so then you're down into the one place that you've interviewed is Texas. So what was it like doing your interviews in Texas?
It was very different. I think it was totally different just because they were in America. When you're abroad in different countries, everybody knows about America. So, but they all have their own like distinct views on it based on their media, you know, their culture, whatever. Mm-hmm. But when you're here, it's like all that is just gone, and it's just, you know, it's just the people in this country.
I see. So then what you're saying is...
So I guess what I'm saying is, like, when we were out there, when we were in Europe, you had all of Europe that people were thinking about because they're acting as a country. I mean, the EU, you know, they know everything about each other.
Yeah.
So that was all being taken into consideration when we talked to people. And then also, you know, they're just as invested in American politics as we are, if not more in some cases. So when we came back to Texas, a lot of the people that we talked to, it was like they just had so much less to worry about in a way, where it felt sort of simpler, I guess, less things impacting what they had to say.
So then they could have random opinions on whatever it is that may or may not impact them, is what you're saying?
It was almost like there was less of a need to care, sort of.
Weird.
If that makes sense. And that was a big reason why we did this in the first place, is because we looked around and felt that a lot of Americans don't even really need to care. It's like this weird, like, isolation, like literally and figuratively. I mean, we're just totally miles and miles away from Europe. And the interviews reflected that.
Well, I'm curious, man. I'm curious to see how this all comes together.
Me too.
I'm definitely fascinated. I'm fascinated with the interviews that you got. And I think it's a really great topic. And I think that, you know, as political as it is, it's also just an interesting piece on people.
That's what I was really happy about, is it got beyond politics, and that's what I wanted.
That's great, dude. All right. So you're about to, what's next for you? What's the next steps?
I'm going to watch it all, sync up all the interviews, transcribe.
How many hours of footage do you have right now?
Right now we got 32, but we do have some more to shoot around here. We have to go to DC and New York at some point this summer. But I'm imagining that we'll be up around 36 when all is said and done. And then when all is said and done and it's not enough, we'll go shoot more.
Yeah. So do you have a deadline for the whole thing? Do you have a date where you want this stuff done?
We're giving a rough date of mid-February, but we don't have an exact date yet. And I think that's going to be pretty short, honestly. I think we'll need more time than that.
Yeah. I mean, because you're now hitting, in my opinion, what is the most difficult portion of a documentary. Because unlike a narrative in which you spend all your time in the front end, years in the front end, sort of writing a script, with a documentary, you're doing that in post, because you're physically writing a story with what it is that you have.
Right.
Which is going to be really difficult. And I think it can be exhausting. And, you know, maybe in one of the future episodes, we'll get my partner Ian to sit down and talk about his process with the documentary. But watching him go through his feature and sort of trying to wrap it out, I think it's really important for you to consider setting a schedule for yourself.
Yeah.
And if you can sit there and say, hey, look, everything's going to be sunk by this date. All the footage that I have is going to be here. I'm going to have a rough cut by this date. I'm going to do these different keystones, and to just be reasonable about the time frame that you're giving yourself. But then you have that thing, because ultimately, who's your client on this? Really, it's
us.
It's you. So just be cautious of that. That would be my advice. Like, I think that as you're going to approach this monolith of tasks, sort of get through this, make sure you set your timelines. You know what I mean?
That's a big step.
Yeah. So without getting serious, I'm proud of you, dude. That's really great. So
thank you. Yeah, it was cool.
Good adventure, and I'm happy that you were able to sit down and share with everybody at home on the adventure. And hopefully some of you young filmmakers out there can learn from what Dave's gone through. And they can also, like, if anybody wanted to contact you to ask you questions, what's the best way to do so?
Sure. You can shoot me an email. David Apostolides at gmail.com.
And send nudes.
That's right. Only nudes. And then maybe you'll get a response.
Okay, well, fantastic. So let's just wrap out of the episode here. I want to thank everybody for listening. And I also want to thank a lot of the fans for their interaction that we've had recently on Instagram. If you go to my Instagram, it's Mike Pecci at Instagram. Over the past few weeks, I have been doing contests to have fans actually see the short version of 12 Cam, because I can't release that yet because there is some pretty epic things happening, which I can't really talk about. So I wanted to at least get some fans to see it, and we ran a couple contests, and one of the paybacks for actually watching it was to actually write some reviews, and we got some really great reviews on the film. And there's still, I mean, years out at this point, there's still such a great interest in that project. So it's just been very exciting interacting with you guys. So if you want to stay up on all this stuff, definitely go to and subscribe to my Instagram account, Mike Pecci at Instagram. I will be doing more contests for folks to see 12 Cam. Plus, I also have I've been wanting to do some shout outs to fans, because I do that post every once in a while where I'm honestly interested as to who's following and what they do. And I think my post is something like, what is your dream job? What do you do right now for a job? Are you happy? And I'm always like blown away by the people that are actually involved in following and the variety. Have you read any of this stuff?
Yeah, you get a lot of cool responses.
Yeah,
it's, people kind of open up there.
It's crazy, and then it sort of goes against everything that a marketer would say about Instagram, where it's like, okay, the only interaction you're going to have here is that people double tapping and liking it,
right?
You know what I mean, and then trying to get likes on their own stuff. But I think if you're genuine and you genuinely want to know about folks, and for me, I'm always looking for great stories, and I'm always looking for really cool experiences that are shared, because, as a director, you're looking to be inspired by other people's stories. So definitely go on to my Instagram if you want to be involved, or if you want to just read about the other folks that do follow us. I mean, they're so fascinating, like butchers and like undertakers and like really crazy people. And then it's also a great place to see the stuff that we're working on. Like I hinted at, fingers crossed, everybody. I'm in the process right now of trying to get a big feature film going, and this has been going on for a few years now. And I have teamed up with a writer, an amazing writer, and I think I could say his name. Fuck it, I'll say his name. This guy, Will Simmons. Will Simmons and I have been working on a feature, and there has been a lot of excitement over the past couple of weeks. I recently signed to UTA, an agency, one of the biggest agencies, which in itself was such a fucking crazy experience actually going to that place. And I signed with a management company, Gotham Group. So I've sort of hit one of these points in my career, which I never thought I'd get to. 18 years out, now I'm signed by a major agency and by a management group. And there's a lot of really exciting learning stuff that's happening that I cannot wait to talk to you guys about as things progress. I'm sorry that I've been so quiet about it as of now, but I just can't blow it, at the last minute. So definitely stay tuned. And hopefully over the next couple months, we'll have some exciting stuff, which will also make this podcast pretty exciting. So thank you for listening, and see you next week. Or not next week. Let me do that again. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you next episode. Actually, I think we're going to do it tomorrow, and I think we're going to sit down and do a whole episode on lighting. And if you guys know my work, you know that I am absolutely in love with light. And so I have a couple folks that I'm going to sit down with, and we're going to get nerdy. So definitely stay tuned. So thanks, Dave, for being here with us.
Of course. See you next time.
Today's episode of In Love with the Process wouldn't be made possible without help by Puget Systems. If you are a filmmaker, photographer, or digital artist, and you are looking to upgrade your edit system, and the price tag on the new Mac machines seems to be too steep for you, there are options. Believe it or not, I edit all of my stuff these days on a PC, and I consider myself a professional, and I work with other professional houses without a problem. And I ended up teaming up with the boys over at Puget Systems. So if you head over to PugetSystems.com, you can actually sort through the different software options that you use, and they will suggest a starting hardware package that works for you. Or here's the really great thing about Puget is that unlike a lot of other places that you buy computers and it's all automated online, you can actually talk to these guys directly. You can tell them specifically what it is that you're doing. You can tell them how that you want to be able to upgrade. You can tell them about how your career is going to change. And they really love to talk about movies, actually. They love to talk about your work. So they're a great company to go and purchase a new edit system from. So PugetSystems.com, check their stuff out. Okay, another sponsor for today is Azo monitors. So if you are a photographer or a color corrector and you're looking to make sure that the colors that you're tweaking on your edit system end up looking that way, either printed or on a TV or on a cell phone, you definitely need to get your hands on a calibrated monitor. I use the CG277, which has a self-calibrating option. So whenever you turn it on, it'll actually calibrate itself based upon your environment to make sure that the colors on the screen are actually what the colors are going to be. So if you're in the market and you're buying a new PC from Puget, you may want to take all that money that you saved on that PC and pick yourself up a really good color calibrated monitor. Okay, now the sponsor for this episode are our buddies over at Rule Boston Camera. So as a freelance director and a DP, I believe in having a very strong relationship with my local rental house, and I suggest you do the same. One of the benefits of having a relationship with your local rental house is that these guys will give you access to the newest and greatest gear whenever you need it, make sure that it works, and they will ensure that it works for you. So that way you don't have to blow your bank on trying to buy the newest thing that comes out on the market and be constantly in debt with your equipment. Like I said, if you're on the East Coast, my favorite place to go is Rule Boston Camera. Not only do they have everything on the market that's out right now, but they also run training courses. They're really cool guys to talk to, and I've been working with them for about 18 years. So Rule Boston Camera. Also, sponsor is my company, McFarlane & Pecci. Together, Ian McFarlane and I have been directing for over 9 years together. We started doing music videos for a lot of heavy metal acts and some hip hop acts, and then we've slowly gone into doing commercials and movies at this point. Ian is putting his finishing touches on his brand new feature-length documentary called The Godfathers of Hardcore, and it's an amazing film. It's really exciting because he's actually getting to the point where he's figuring out distribution. And hopefully I can have him on the podcast after everything happens, because there's a lot of lessons to be learned with what he's done. So if you go to McFarlaneandPecci.com, you can see some clips from his film on that. You can see some of the commercials that we're working on, some of the stuff that keeps me busy in my day-to-day. And hopefully you'll be entertained and influenced. So once again, thank you for listening, and I would ask you all to subscribe to us on SoundCloud or iTunes. And if you want to see this stuff in video form or any of the other small video projects that we put together, you can follow In Love with the Process on YouTube. And definitely follow me on Instagram. I interact with you guys. So it's Mike Pecci at Instagram. So thanks so much for listening.